Don't cry, honey. I'll help you find your daddy. The words came out softly, almost a whisper amid the chaos of Michigan Avenue. Rosa knelt on the cold ground, ignoring the dirt staining her already worn cleaning uniform. In front of her, a blonde little girl no more than 7 years old was huddled against a storefront window, trembling. Her navy blue dress was too expensive for that sidewalk, her blue eyes too swollen for someone so small. Dozens of people rushed past, men in suits, women in high heels, all in a hurry, all looking through the child as if she were invisible. No one stopped. No one cared. But Rosa stopped. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" Rosa asked gently, taking off her own jacket, the only one she owned, and placing it over the girl's shaking shoulders. I ran away from home," the little girl sobbed, her voice broken. "My daddy yelled at me and I just wanted my mommy. But mommy's not here anymore. She's gone forever." Rosa's heart shattered. She knew that pain, that emptiness of losing someone loved. "What's your name?" "Janine." The girl answered, wiping tears with her small hands. Rosa had no idea she was about to meet the man she'd loved desperately at 17. She didn't know that this little girl crying on the sidewalk was the daughter of a millionaire CEO. She couldn't imagine that one simple act of kindness would change 3 lives forever. All Rosa knew was that she couldn't leave this child alone in the cold. "Let's get you home, honey," Rosa said, extending her hand. And when Janine held her fingers with absolute trust, as if Rosa were the answer to all her prayers, something impossible began to happen. A love story that destiny had written 12 years ago, but was only now ready to be told. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The October wind cut through the streets of Chicago like a cold knife, carrying with it the scent of rain and fallen leaves. Rosa Townsend pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the Willis Towers service entrance. Her feet ached with that deep, bone-tired pain that came from standing for 8 hours straight, scrubbing floors and wiping down windows on the 42nd floor. Her hands, rough and reddened from chemicals, trembled slightly as she checked her phone. 5:45 in the evening. If she hurried, she could catch the 6 o'clock bus and make it home by 7:30, maybe grab something cheap for dinner, collapse into bed, and do it all over again tomorrow. Rosa was 29 years old, but some days she felt twice that age. Her blonde hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail, had strands escaping around her face. Her green eyes, once bright with dreams and possibilities, now carried the weight of too many disappointments, too many bills, too many nights wondering if this was all life had to offer. But even in her exhaustion, there was something unbreakable in Rosa. She kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept believing that somewhere ahead things would get better. They had to. She began her walk toward the bus stop on Michigan Avenue, navigating through the evening rush of business people in expensive suits, tourists with cameras, and street musicians playing for spare change. The city hummed with life and energy, everyone moving with purpose, everyone belonging somewhere. Rosa sometimes felt like a ghost moving through their world, invisible, insignificant, just another face in the crowd, another person struggling to survive. But then she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. On the cold sidewalk, pressed against a storefront window, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with blonde hair that caught the fading light and the most heartbreaking blue eyes Rosa had ever seen. The child wore a navy blue dress that looked expensive, the kind of thing you'd see in boutique windows on the Magnificent Mile. But she was hunched over, arms wrapped around her knees, shaking, not just from the cold, Rosa realized as she watched. The little girl was crying, silent tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Rosa looked around, expecting to see a frantic parent searching, calling out. But the crowd just kept flowing past the child like water around a stone. Businessmen with briefcases, women in heels clicking urgently toward their destinations, couples holding hands and laughing. Everyone saw the little girl. Rosa was certain of that. But no one stopped. No one helped. No one even slowed down. Something in Rosa's chest tightened painfully. She thought of all the times in her own life when she'd felt invisible, when she'd needed help and no one had noticed. She thought of the little girl she'd been once, full of dreams, before life had taught her that the world could be cruel and indifferent. Without conscious thought, Rosa's feet carried her toward the child. She approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her, and crouched down to the little girl's level. Up close she could see that the child had been crying for a while. Her eyes were red and swollen, her nose was running, and she was shivering violently despite the expensive dress. Rosa's heart broke a little more. "Hi there, sweetheart," Rosa said softly, her voice gentle as a lullaby. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The little girl's head jerked up, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, Rosa thought she would run or scream. But then something shifted in those blue eyes. Maybe it was the genuine kindness in Rosa's face or the warmth in her voice despite her own exhaustion. The child's lower lip trembled and fresh tears spilled over. I ran away from home," the little girl whispered, her voice so small Rosa had to lean closer to hear. "Daddy got really mad at me because I spilled juice on his important papers in his office. He yelled so loud and I was scared, and I just wanted my mommy. But mommy isn't here anymore. She's gone. She's been gone for so long and I miss her so much." The words tumbled out in a rush, mixed with hiccuping sobs, and Rosa felt tears prickling her own eyes. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a broken-hearted little girl carrying a grief too heavy for her small shoulders. Without hesitation, Rosa shrugged out of her jacket, the only one she owned, and draped it around the child's trembling shoulders. The October evening was already cold, and without the jacket, Rosa immediately felt the chill seeping through her thin work uniform. But the little girl needed it more. "What's your name, honey?" Rosa asked, rubbing the child's arms gently to warm her up. "Janine." The little girl sniffled, pulling Rosa's jacket tighter around herself. Even through her tears, there was a flicker of something in her eyes as she looked at Rosa. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "What's your name?" "I'm Rosa. Rosa Townsend." She smiled, reaching out to gently wipe away some of the tears from Janine's cheeks with her thumb. "That's a beautiful name, Janine. And I love your dress. That blue is gorgeous." "Mommy bought it for me," Janine said, her voice catching. Before the accident. I wear it sometimes when I really miss her. I thought maybe if I wore it today it would make Daddy nicer, but he was just mad anyway." Rosa's heart clenched. She could read between the lines of what this child was saying. A mother lost to an accident, a father buried in grief and work, a little girl caught in the middle, desperate for love and attention. "I'm sure your daddy loves you very much," Rosa said carefully. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad or stressed, they don't always show their love the right way. But I bet he's very worried about you right now." "No, he's not," Janine said with a certainty that made Rosa's chest ache. "He's probably still in his office. He doesn't even know I left. He never knows where I am. Margaret, that's the lady who takes care of me. She might notice when it's dinner time. But Daddy won't. He never does." The matter-of-fact way Janine said this, without anger or blame, just sad acceptance, made Rosa want to cry. This beautiful little girl, sitting on a cold sidewalk, believing her father didn't care enough to notice she was gone. Rosa knew that feeling, that hollow ache of being unseen by the people who were supposed to love you most. "Well, it's getting dark and cold," Rosa said, making a decision that would change all their lives, though she didn't know it yet. "And I can't leave you here alone. How about we get you home safely? Where do you live, sweetheart?" Janine rattled off an address that made Rosa's eyebrows rise. Gold Coast, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago where homes cost millions and you needed a gate code just to walk down the street. Rosa mentally calculated the bus routes. It would take at least an hour and a half with transfers, and she'd have to use money she'd budgeted for groceries for the week. But looking into Janine's hopeful blue eyes, Rosa knew she couldn't walk away. "All right then," Rosa said, standing up and offering her hand. "Let's get you home." Janine looked at Rosa's outstretched hand for a long moment, as if she couldn't quite believe this stranger would help her. Then, with a trust that made Rosa's throat tight with emotion, the little girl placed her small hand in Rosa's and stood up. They walked together toward the bus stop, hand in hand. Rosa could feel Janine's fingers, small and cold, gripping hers tightly, as if afraid Rosa might disappear if she let go. They must have made an odd pair, Rosa thought. An exhausted woman in a cleaning company uniform and a little girl in an expensive dress, both blonde, both looking a little lost in the big city. But right then, they had each other, and that was enough. On the bus, Rosa guided Janine to a seat by the window and sat down beside her. The bus was crowded with evening commuters, people tired and grumpy from long work days, all lost in their phones or staring blankly ahead. But in their little corner, Rosa and Janine created their own world. "So," Rosa said gently, "tell me about your mommy. What was she like?" Janine's face lit up despite the tears still clinging to her lashes. She was the most beautiful person in the whole world. She had dark brown hair that was really long, and she always smelled like vanilla and flowers. She made pancakes every Sunday morning in the shape of hearts, and she would put chocolate chips in them for me. And she sang. Oh, Rosa. She sang all the time, in the car, while cooking, when she tucked me into bed. She had the prettiest voice. "She sounds absolutely wonderful," Rosa said, and meant it. She could picture this woman, this Eleanor, filling a house with love and music and heart-shaped pancakes. "She was," Janine said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And then one day when I was 4, there was an accident, a car accident, and she didn't come home. Daddy told me she went to heaven and that she's always watching over me, but I can't see her or hear her or hug her anymore. And it hurts so much, Rosa. It hurts all the time." Rosa wrapped her arm around Janine's shoulders and pulled her close. "I know, baby, I know it does. I lost my parents too a few years ago. And you're right, it hurts. But you know what helps? Remembering the good things. The pancakes, the songs, the smell of vanilla and flowers. Your mommy lives on in your memories and in your heart. She's part of you forever." "Do you really think so?" Janine asked, looking up at Rosa with those impossibly blue eyes, desperate for comfort, for hope. "I know so," Rosa said firmly. "And I bet your mommy is very proud of the brave, kind girl you're becoming." They talked the whole way, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Janine told Rosa about her school, how she was learning to read chapter books now and how she loved art class but hated math. She told Rosa about Margaret, the housekeeper who was nice but not the same as having a real mom. She told Rosa about her room, painted purple with stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark. And with each word, each story, Rosa felt her connection to this child deepening in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Rosa shared pieces of her own life too, about how she'd wanted to be a teacher once, how she'd had to leave college to care for her sick parents, how she worked 2 jobs now but still had dreams of going back to school someday. She made Janine laugh with stories about clumsy moments at work and the funny regular customers at the coffee shop where she worked mornings. For those precious minutes on the bus, neither of them felt quite so alone. When they finally reached Gold Coast and walked up to the address Janine had given, Rosa stopped and stared. Calling it a house was like calling the ocean a puddle. It was a mansion, 3 stories of pristine stone and glass, with manicured gardens, a fountain in the circular driveway, and gates that probably cost more than Rosa made in a year. Several cars were parked haphazardly in front, including a police SUV with lights flashing silently. "Janine," Rosa said slowly, her heart starting to pound, "your father must be very worried. Look, the police are here." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Janine's face. "Maybe he does care a little," she said quietly. Before Rosa could respond, the front door burst open and a woman in her late 50s, wearing an apron and with her gray hair in a neat bun, came running out. Her face was streaked with tears. "Janine! Oh my God, Janine!" The woman, who must be Margaret, ran to them and swept Janine into her arms, sobbing. "Where were you? We've been looking everywhere. I was so scared, baby, so scared." I'm sorry, Margaret, Janine said, her voice small. I didn't mean to make you worry. Rosa found me and brought me home. Margaret turned to Rosa, her eyes red but filled with profound gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please come inside. Mr. Cosentino will want to thank you personally. Rosa's first instinct was to refuse, to leave quickly. She felt completely out of place in her stained work uniform, smelling of cleaning products, about to enter a mansion that probably had more bathrooms than her entire apartment building. But Janine grabbed her hand again, holding tight, and Rosa couldn't bring herself to let go. Margaret led them through the front entrance, and Rosa tried not to gape. The foyer alone was bigger than her entire studio apartment. Marble floors gleamed under a crystal chandelier. A sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor. Fresh flowers in vases that probably cost more than Rosa's rent filled the air with the scent of roses and lilies. Original artwork hung on the walls. This was a different world, a world Rosa had only ever seen in magazines or movies. They walked into what appeared to be a living room, though it was grander than any living room Rosa had ever been in. Plush cream-colored sofas, more artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, and in the center of it all, pacing like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear, was a man. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with a lean but athletic build evident even under his obviously expensive suit. His dark brown hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His face was handsome in that sharp, angular way that came from good genes and better nutrition. But it was his eyes, dark brown and currently wild with panic, that caught Rosa's attention. Yes, my daughter, she's 7 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a navy blue dress, he was saying urgently into the phone. I don't know how long she's been gone. I was in my office and Mr. Cosentino, Margaret interrupted gently. The man spun around and his eyes immediately found Janine. The phone dropped from his hand, clattering on the marble floor. For a second, he just stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he moved, crossing the room in 3 long strides and dropping to his knees in front of his daughter. Janine, he breathed, and his voice cracked on her name. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight Rosa worried he might hurt her. But Janine melted into the embrace, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Oh God, Janine, you're safe. You're home. I was so scared. So scared. I'm okay, Daddy, Janine said into his shoulder. Rosa found me. She helped me. At the mention of her name, the man looked up and his eyes met Rosa's. And in that moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. Rosa felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. Her heart stuttered, then raced, because she knew this face. Older, harder, marked by grief and stress, but unmistakable. Rosa, the man whispered, and his face went white as chalk. Rosa Townsend? Rosa's legs felt weak. Her mouth went dry. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. Alan, she managed to choke out. Alan Cosentino? Time seemed to fold in on itself. Rosa was suddenly 17 again, holding hands with a brilliant, ambitious boy who dreamed of changing the world. She remembered his laugh, his intensity, the way he'd looked at her like she was his whole universe. She remembered the heartbreak when he left for MIT, the promises they'd made to stay together, the slow, painful drift apart as life pulled them in different directions. She remembered hearing years later through mutual friends they'd both lost touch with, that he'd gotten married, had a baby, was building a tech company, and later still the whisper that his wife had died tragically. But she'd never imagined, never in her wildest dreams, that she'd see him again, and certainly not like this. Alan stood slowly, still holding Janine with one arm, staring at Rosa as if she were an apparition. How is this possible? You brought Janine home? Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. She was acutely aware of how she must look right now. Exhausted, dirty from a day of cleaning, in her cheap uniform with her hair a mess, and Alan looked like he'd stepped out of a Forbes magazine cover. The contrast was almost painful. I found her on Michigan Avenue, Rosa finally managed to say, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. She was alone and scared. I couldn't just leave her there. I brought her home. Alan's eyes were doing something complicated, cycling through shock, recognition, disbelief, and something else Rosa couldn't quite identify. Pain, maybe, or regret. Rosa Townsend, he said again, as if testing the name on his tongue. After all these years, you saved my daughter. Anyone would have, Rosa said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Dozens of people had walked past Janine. Only Rosa had stopped. Rosa's my friend, Janine announced, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. She's nice, Daddy. She gave me her jacket and talked to me about Mommy and took me home on the bus. Can she stay for dinner? Please? Alan looked at his daughter, then back at Rosa, and something in his expression shifted. The shock was giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. Please, he said quietly. Stay. It's the least I can offer after what you did. And I'd like to talk, if you're willing. Rosa knew she should leave. This was too much, too complicated, too painful. The boy she'd loved desperately when they were teenagers had become this man. This stranger in an expensive suit with a daughter and a dead wife and a mansion that made her feel tiny and insignificant. But Janine was looking at her with such hope, and Alan's eyes held something that looked almost like pleading, and Rosa found herself nodding. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with open curiosity, quickly excused herself to inform the police that Janine had been found safe and to prepare dinner. Alan carefully set Janine down and guided them both to the elegant dining room, where a table that could seat 12 gleamed under yet another chandelier. Dinner was one of the most surreal experiences of Rosa's life. She sat at a table that probably cost more than her car, which had died 2 years ago and she'd never been able to replace, eating food prepared by a private chef that tasted better than anything she'd had in years. Alan sat at the head of the table, Janine to his right and Rosa to his left. The little girl chattered away, filling the silence that the adults struggled to navigate, telling her father in excited detail about her adventure and how Rosa had rescued her. Alan listened to his daughter with an attention Rosa recognized. It was the same intense focus he'd had as a teenager when something mattered to him. He asked Janine questions, really listened to her answers, and Rosa could see him making mental notes of everything his daughter was revealing. The loneliness, the feeling of being unseen, the desperate missing of her mother. With each revelation, Alan's face grew more pained, more guilty. Janine, Alan said gently when she paused for breath. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I made you feel like I don't care. I do care. You're the most important thing in my world. But I've been... He struggled for words. I've been stuck. Since Mommy died, I've been stuck in a place where I didn't know how to be sad and be a dad at the same time. So I tried not to be sad by working all the time. But that meant I wasn't being a dad either. And that's not fair to you. Janine's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than before. These were tears of relief, of hope. So you're not mad that I ran away? Oh, baby, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at myself. You should never feel like running away is your only option. From now on, things are going to change. I promise I'm going to be here, really here, okay? Okay, Daddy. Janine smiled through her tears, and it was like watching the sun come out. After dinner, when Janine went with Margaret to get ready for bed, Alan and Rosa found themselves alone for the first time. They gravitated to the back terrace, which overlooked the gardens, now dark and mysterious in the evening. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, a million lights holding back the night. I can't believe it's really you, Alan said quietly, standing beside her at the railing. Rosa Townsend, standing in my house. After 12 years. 13, Rosa corrected softly. It's been 13 years since we last saw each other. 13 years, Alan repeated, and the weight of all that time hung between them. Rosa, what happened? After I went to MIT, we tried to stay in touch, but then... Life happened, Rosa said simply. My dad got diagnosed with cancer that first year you were away. Then my mom had a stroke. I had to come home, had to take care of them. I couldn't afford school and caregiving, so I dropped out. Alan's face crumpled with pain. Rosa, I didn't know. If I had known, what would you have done, Alan? Dropped out of MIT and come back to Chicago to be poor with me? That wouldn't have helped anyone. You were building your future. I was dealing with my present. We were kids and we wanted different things. I never wanted anything more than I wanted you, Alan said with such raw honesty that Rosa's breath caught. But I was a coward. When you stopped answering my calls as much, when your letters got shorter and less frequent, I should have come home. Should have fought for us. Instead, I told myself you were moving on, that you wanted space. I made it easier on myself by believing a lie. I did want space, Rosa admitted. Not because I didn't love you. God, Alan, I loved you so much it hurt. But I was drowning, and I didn't want to pull you down with me. You had this bright, shining future ahead of you. I was stuck in hospital waiting rooms and medical bills. I couldn't be your dream girl anymore, so I let you go. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of old grief and regret settling over them like a blanket. Then Alan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I met Eleanor at MIT, my junior year. She was studying art education. She was kind and gentle, and when she smiled, it reminded me of you. I think that's why I fell for her. She was like a less painful version of you. Rosa felt tears sliding down her cheeks but didn't brush them away. I'm glad you found someone, Alan. Truly. Janine is beautiful, and from what she said about Eleanor, she was an amazing woman and mother. She was, Alan agreed, and his voice was thick with emotion. We got married young, had Janine right away. We were happy. Not passionate, not intense like we were, but comfortable, content. And then 3 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light. Eleanor was just going to the grocery store. She died before the ambulance arrived. And I broke. Janine was only 4. She needed me more than ever, and I completely fell apart. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense, the only place where I had control. And I abandoned my daughter emotionally, even though I was still physically there. I became exactly the kind of father I swore I'd never be. Rosa turned to face him fully, seeing the anguish in his eyes, the self-loathing. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the railing. You're not a bad father, Alan. You're a grieving man who made some mistakes. But you're trying to fix them. That's what matters. And Janine loves you. That was clear in everything she said about you, even the sad parts. She doesn't need a perfect father. She just needs one who's present. Alan looked down at her hand on his, and something in his expression shifted. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were intense, searching. What about you, Rosa? What's your life like now? Are you married? Kids? No and no, Rosa said with a sad smile. After my parents died 5 years ago, I was buried in medical debt. I've been working 2 jobs just to survive. No time for dating, much less marriage or children. Though I'd like them someday. I always wanted to be a teacher, to have a classroom full of kids, maybe some of my own. But that dream feels very far away right now. 2 jobs? Alan's brow furrowed. You said you work at a coffee shop and as a cleaner. Rosa nodded, feeling a flush of shame. I do mornings at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, then afternoons cleaning offices downtown. Where I work, actually, where I found Janine. I'd just finished my shift. Alan was quiet for a moment, and Rosa braced herself for pity or judgment. But when he spoke, his voice was soft and earnest. Rosa, you're one of the strongest people I've ever known. You were strong at 17 when you sacrificed your dreams for your family. And you're strong now, working 2 jobs, still dreaming, still surviving. I'm in awe of you. The compliment, so sincere and unexpected, made Rosa's throat tighten with emotion. I don't feel strong most days. I feel tired and scared and like I'm barely keeping my head above water. That's what strength looks like, Alan said. It's not fearlessness. It's being afraid and tired and doing what needs to be done anyway. You saved my daughter tonight, Rosa. Not just by bringing her home physically, but by making her feel seen and valued. You gave her something I've failed to give her for 3 years. Hope. Comfort. Love. I can never repay you for that. Before Rosa could respond, they heard small footsteps, and Janine appeared in the doorway, wearing pink pajamas with stars on them, her hair damp from a bath. "Rosa, will you read me a bedtime story?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Alan started to protest. "Janine, Rosa's had a long day. She needs to—" "I'd love to," Rosa interrupted, smiling at the little girl. Because the truth was, she wasn't ready to leave yet. Wasn't ready to go back to her lonely apartment and the reality of her life. For just a little longer, she wanted to stay in this impossible bubble where she was needed and wanted. Janine's bedroom was a child's paradise. Purple walls with glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling. Shelves full of books and toys. A canopy bed with sheer curtains that made it look like something from a fairy tale. And covering one entire wall, hundreds of drawings. Rosa moved closer, realizing with a pang that every single drawing was of the same woman. Dark hair, kind eyes, warm smile. Eleanor. Janine's way of holding on to her mother, of keeping her memory alive. "She's beautiful," Rosa said softly as Janine climbed into bed. "I'm scared I'm forgetting what she really looked like," Janine confessed. "I draw her so I won't forget, but the pictures in my head are getting fuzzy." Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, stroking Janine's hair gently. "Honey, it's okay if the pictures get fuzzy. You were so young when she passed. But you know what never gets fuzzy? Love. Your love for her and her love for you, that's forever. It lives right here." Rosa placed her hand gently over Janine's heart. "And every time you make heart-shaped pancakes or sing a song or are kind to someone, you're keeping her alive in the world. That's more important than remembering exactly what she looked like." Janine considered this, then nodded slowly. "Will you come back, Rosa? Will you visit me again?" The question caught Rosa off guard. She looked over at Alan, who was standing in the doorway watching them with an unreadable expression. I don't know, sweetheart. Your dad and we have complicated history. But you like each other, right? I can tell. People who like each other should spend time together. That's what Mommy used to say." Rosa couldn't help but smile at the child's simple logic. Your mommy sounds like she was very wise. After reading 2 stories and singing a soft lullaby that her own mother used to sing to her, Rosa finally managed to extract herself from Janine's room. The little girl was fighting sleep, clearly afraid that if she closed her eyes, Rosa would disappear. But eventually, exhaustion won, and Janine drifted off, her small hand still clutching Rosa's fingers. Rosa carefully freed herself and tiptoed out of the room, finding Alan waiting in the hallway. "You're a natural with her," he said quietly. "I always wanted to work with kids," Rosa reminded him, "before life got in the way." They walked back downstairs together, and Rosa knew it was time to leave. It was already past 9, and she had to be up at 5 for her morning shift at the coffee shop. But she was reluctant to go, to leave this beautiful house and this man who had once been her whole world, and this little girl who had somehow wrapped herself around Rosa's heart in just a few hours. At the front door, Alan stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Rosa, wait. I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but please hear me out." Rosa turned to face him, her heart racing. "Okay. Janine needs someone. She needs someone who can be there for her emotionally in a way I'm still learning to be. Someone who understands loss and pain but hasn't been broken by it. Someone who can make her feel loved and safe. She needs you, Rosa, and I'm asking if you would consider working for me. As Janine's nanny or companion or whatever title feels right. I'll pay you whatever you need, enough to leave both your other jobs. You'd have your own room here, or we could arrange an apartment nearby if you prefer. Whatever makes you comfortable. Janine smiled tonight, really smiled. I haven't seen that in months, and I don't want it to go away." Rosa stared at him, speechless. "Work for Alan? Live in this house? Take care of Janine?" It was too much, too sudden, too complicated. They had so much unresolved history. And yet the offer was tempting in a way that terrified her. To leave behind the grinding exhaustion of 2 jobs, the constant stress of barely making ends meet, to spend her days with a little girl she'd already fallen a bit in love with, to see Alan every day to maybe find out if the spark she'd felt between them tonight was real or just nostalgia. Alan, I don't know what to say. It's a lot. I know, Alan said quickly, and I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Think about it. Take all the time you need. Here. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, then wrote a phone number on the back. My personal cell. Call me when you've made a decision. Or if you need anything. Anything at all. Rosa took the card, her fingers brushing his, and felt that spark again. Definitely not just nostalgia. Thank you, Alan, for dinner, for the offer, for being someone I'm glad I ran into again, even in such strange circumstances. Alan smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. I'm glad too, Rosa. More than you know. A car service, arranged by Alan, drove Rosa home to her tiny studio apartment in Lincoln Park. As she rode through the nighttime streets of Chicago, she felt like she'd been through a dream. The whole evening had a surreal, too-good-to-be-true quality. She kept expecting to wake up and find herself still on the bus, still exhausted and alone, still struggling through another endless day. But when she got home and changed out of her work uniform, Alan's business card fell out of her pocket. She picked it up, running her thumb over his name, printed in elegant letters. Alan Cosentino, CEO, Cosentino Tech Industries. And on the back, in handwriting she still recognized after all these years, his personal number. That night Rosa barely slept. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, her mind spinning. Could she really do this? Accept Alan's offer? Work for him? Be part of Janine's life? The practical part of her brain was screaming yes. She was exhausted, barely surviving financially, and this was a lifeline. But her heart was more cautious. Alan wasn't just her ex-boyfriend from high school. He'd been her first love, her first everything. The person she'd imagined spending her whole life with before reality had torn them apart. Could she be around him every day and not fall for him again? Did she even want to resist? And then there was Janine. In just a few hours, that little girl had worked her way into Rosa's heart. Rosa couldn't stop thinking about her, worrying about her, wanting to protect her from all the pain and loneliness she'd been carrying. Janine needed someone, and Rosa needed to be needed. Maybe they could help each other heal. Over the next 3 days, Rosa agonized over the decision. She talked it over with her best friend Rachel, who worked at the coffee shop with her. Rachel, practical and no-nonsense, thought Rosa would be crazy to turn down the offer. Let me get this straight, Rachel said as they prepared lattes during the morning rush. Hot billionaire ex-boyfriend offers you a job that pays more than both your current jobs combined, includes room and board, and lets you basically be a mom to a sweet little girl who adores you? And you're hesitating why, exactly? Because it's complicated, Rosa protested, wiping down the espresso machine with more force than necessary. Alan and I have history, serious history. What if working for him is awkward? What if old feelings come up? Rachel raised an eyebrow. Honey, old feelings have already come up. I can hear it in your voice every time you say his name. And so what if it's complicated? When has your life not been complicated? At least this complication comes with health insurance and a salary that might let you finally go back to school. But what if I get attached to Janine and then something happens? What if Alan decides this was a mistake? Or Janine decides she doesn't like me after a few weeks, or what if it works out? Rachel interrupted gently. What if this is the universe finally giving you a break after years of struggling? What if this is your chance at the life you always dreamed of? Teaching, motherhood, maybe even love. Are you really going to say no because you're scared? Rosa had no answer to that. Because Rachel was right. She was scared, terrified actually. But she was also tired of being scared, tired of playing it safe, tired of letting life happen to her instead of making choices that could change her trajectory. On the fourth day after meeting Janine, Rosa picked up her phone and dialed the number Alan had written on his card. Her hands were shaking as she listened to it ring once, twice. "Hello?" Alan's voice warm and professional. "Alan, it's Rosa." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, she could hear the smile in his voice. "Rosa, I'm glad you called. I've been hoping you would." "I've thought about your offer," Rosa said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. "And I'd like to accept, but I have some conditions." "Name them," Alan said immediately. "First, we need clear boundaries. I'm there for Janine, as her nanny and companion. That's the relationship we're establishing. Whatever history you and I have, we don't let it affect my job or Janine's well-being." "Agreed." "Second, I want to use part of my salary to pay for online classes. I'm going to finish my degree, Alan. This isn't just a job for me, it's a stepping stone to the future I want." "Rosa, I would happily pay for your entire education separate from your salary." "No," Rosa said firmly. "That's too much. I need to do this myself. But I need the time and the financial stability to make it possible. That's what this job gives me." "All right, what else?" "If at any point this isn't working for any reason, we need to be honest about it. I won't stay if it's hurting Janine or you or me. We need to promise to communicate openly." "I promise," Alan said solemnly. "When can you start?" "I need to give notice at both my jobs." 2 weeks? Perfect. Rosa. Alan paused and his voice softened. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "To us?" "I think I do," Rosa said quietly. "I'll see you in 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks flew by in a blur of packing up her tiny apartment, saying goodbye to Rachel and her co-workers, and trying to prepare herself mentally for the massive change her life was about to undergo. She'd been living in survival mode for so long that the idea of actual stability felt foreign and slightly terrifying. On the morning she was supposed to move into the Cosentino mansion, Rosa stood in her empty apartment, looking at the bare walls and echoing rooms. She'd lived here for 3 years, struggling and fighting and barely hanging on. It had been a hard time, maybe the hardest of her life, but she'd survived it. And now she was stepping into something new, something that scared her but also filled her with hope. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alan. "Car is outside whenever you're ready. Take your time. We're excited to have you." Rosa picked up her 2 suitcases, everything she owned in the world fitting into 2 pieces of luggage, and walked out of her old life towards something that might, just might, be the beginning of her happily ever after. When she arrived at the mansion, Margaret met her at the door with a warm smile and a hug that surprised Rosa. "Welcome home, dear." Janine has been counting down the days. As if summoned by her name, Janine came running down the grand staircase, her face lit up with pure joy. "Rosa, you're here. You're really here. I thought maybe you were a dream, but you're real." Rosa dropped her suitcases and caught Janine as the little girl launched herself into her arms. "I'm real, sweetheart, and I'm here to stay." Over Janine's blonde head, Rosa saw Alan descending the stairs more slowly. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, wearing just dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, and when their eyes met, his smile was genuine and warm. "Welcome, Rosa," he said simply. But the way he looked at her said so much more. The first few weeks of Rosa's new life were an adjustment. Margaret showed her to her room in the guest wing, which was bigger than her entire old apartment and beautifully decorated in soft blues and creams. Rosa had her own bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, a walk-in closet that echoed with emptiness when she hung up her handful of clothes, and windows that overlooked the gardens. It was more luxury than she'd ever imagined, and sometimes she felt like an imposter playing dress-up in someone else's life. But then Janine would come bouncing into her room in the morning, climb into bed with her and chatter about her dreams, and Rosa would remember why she was there. She'd come downstairs to find Alan already in the kitchen, having learned to make those heart-shaped pancakes Janine had mentioned, and the 3 of them would have breakfast together before Alan left for work, and Rosa took Janine to school. Rosa quickly established a routine with Janine. She'd pick her up from school, and they'd have snack time where Janine would tell her about her day. Then homework, with Rosa discovering that she was actually pretty good at explaining math concepts in ways that made sense to a 7-year-old. After that, they'd do something fun. Some days it was art projects, Janine's favorite. Other days they'd go to the park or the library or the aquarium. Rosa wanted Janine to experience the world outside the mansion, to understand that privilege came with responsibility. And slowly, carefully, Rosa also pushed Alan to be more present. When Janine had a school play, Rosa made it clear that Alan would be attending no matter what board meeting or investor call he had scheduled. When it was picture day, Rosa made sure Alan was there in the morning to see Janine off in her special outfit. When Janine scored her first goal in soccer, Alan was in the stands cheering, having left work early for the first time in years. Rosa watched Alan transform from a distance. The guilt-ridden, grief-stricken man she'd first reunited with was slowly being replaced by someone who laughed more, who got down on the floor to play with his daughter, who was learning to be present in the moment rather than constantly thinking about work. It was beautiful to witness, but it was also hard for Rosa to maintain those boundaries she'd set. Because the more time she spent with Alan, the more she remembered why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. His intelligence, his intensity, his surprising vulnerability. The way he looked at her sometimes like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. The way his hand would brush hers accidentally and send electricity through her whole body. The way he'd smile at her across the dinner table. A smile that was just for her, full of history and possibility. They had 1,000 almost moments. Times when they'd be standing close together, watching Janine play, and Rosa would feel the pull between them. Times when they'd both reach for the same thing and their fingers would tangle, and neither would pull away immediately. Times when Alan would say her name in a certain way with a certain tone, and Rosa would remember being 17 and so desperately in love. But they never acted on it. Rosa, because she was afraid of complicating things, of losing this job and this little girl she'd come to love. And Alan, because he respected her boundaries, even though Rosa could see in his eyes that he wanted more. Then came the complications Rosa hadn't anticipated. About 6 weeks after she'd moved in, Alan hosted a business dinner at the house. Rosa planned to stay in her room or with Janine, keeping out of the way, but Alan insisted she join them. "You're not staff, Rosa," he'd said firmly. "You're family, and I want you there." So Rosa had borrowed a dress from Margaret's niece, something simple but elegant, and had come down to dinner. That's when she met Vivian Ashford. Vivian was everything Rosa wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Rosa used to make in a month. She was beautiful in that intimidating way, with perfect makeup and hair that moved like something from a shampoo commercial. And from the moment she saw Rosa, her eyes went cold. "And who is this?" Vivian asked Alan, her tone suggesting she already knew and didn't approve. "This is Rosa Townsend," Alan said, his hand coming to rest lightly on Rosa's back in a gesture that felt protective. "She's Janine's nanny and a dear old friend of mine." "Oh, how lovely," Vivian said, and her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Alan has spoken about needing better childcare arrangements. I'm glad he found someone suitable." The word suitable hung in the air like an insult, and Rosa felt her face heat up. She wanted to defend herself, to point out that she might not have Vivian's designer clothes or perfect hair, but she loved Janine and was good at her job. But she stayed silent, not wanting to cause a scene. Throughout dinner, Vivian made subtle digs, comments about how challenging it must be for Rosa, coming from such a different background. Questions about Rosa's education that were clearly designed to highlight her lack of a degree. Suggestions that Janine might benefit from a nanny with more formal credentials, maybe someone fluent in multiple languages or with a degree in child development. Rosa endured it all with as much grace as she could muster, but inside she was crumbling. Because Vivian was hitting on all her insecurities, all her fears that she wasn't good enough for this world, for this house, for Alan. After dinner, when Vivian cornered her in the hallway, things got worse. I'm going to be honest with you, Vivian said, her voice low and cold. Alan and I have been growing close over the past year. Very close. Before you showed up, we were on the verge of something real, a relationship, marriage even. And then you appear out of nowhere, his ex-girlfriend from high school, and suddenly I'm being pushed aside. I don't know what game you're playing, Rosa, but I'm warning you. Alan is a prize. His company, his wealth, his status. Plenty of women would kill to be in his life. Don't think your little small-town charm and your convenient friendship with his daughter are going to win you a permanent place here. Rosa felt like she'd been slapped. I'm not playing any game, she said, her voice shaking. I'm here for Janine, that's all. Sure you are, Vivian said with a nasty smile. Just remember, women like us, we always end up back where we belong. And you, sweetheart, belong scrubbing floors, not living in mansions. The words hit their target. That night after the dinner guests had left and Janine was asleep, Rosa found herself on the back terrace again, staring at the Chicago skyline and fighting back tears. Vivian was right. Rosa didn't belong here. She was playing dress-up in a life that wasn't meant for her. Eventually, Alan would see it. Janine would see it. And Rosa would be back to cleaning offices and making lattes, except now she'd have the added pain of knowing what she'd lost. Rosa? Alan's voice came from behind her. Are you okay? You seemed upset during dinner. Rosa quickly wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, Alan said gently, coming to stand beside her. What did Vivian say to you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Alan turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. Rosa, Vivian Ashford has been pursuing me for the better part of 2 years. I've never been interested. She's brilliant at her job, which is the only reason she still has it, but on a personal level, she's cold and calculating. The only thing she's attracted to is my money and my status. She doesn't care about Janine, doesn't care about me as a person. So whatever poison she's been dripping in your ear, don't listen to it. She said I don't belong here, Rosa admitted in a small voice. And she's not wrong, Alan. Look at me. I'm a dropout working as a nanny, living in your guest room. I don't fit in your world. Rosa, look at me. Alan waited until she met his eyes. You don't need to fit in my world. My world is empty and cold and full of people like Vivian who only care about appearance and money. You fit in Janine's world, you fit in my heart, that's what matters. Rosa's breath caught. Alan. I know we said boundaries, Alan continued, his voice rough with emotion. I know you're here for Janine, and I've tried so hard to respect that. But Rosa, you have to know. You have to see it. I'm falling for you again. Hell, I don't think I ever stopped. You're not the girl I loved at 17. You're better, stronger, more compassionate. You've been through hell and come out kind and generous and real. And every day I see you with my daughter. Every time you smile at me across the breakfast table, every moment we share, I fall a little more. I love you, Rosa. I never stopped. And I don't want to anymore. The world seemed to stop spinning. Rosa stared at Alan, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection, the desperate hope. And in that moment, all her carefully constructed walls came crashing down. I love you too, she whispered. I've been fighting it, trying to be professional, trying to protect myself. But I love you, Alan. I always have. Alan closed the distance between them in one step, his hands coming up to frame her face gently like she was something precious and breakable. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. Rosa nodded, unable to speak, and then Alan's lips were on hers, and it was like coming home. The kiss started gentle, tentative, relearning each other after so many years. But then it deepened, became more urgent, all the longing and love and lost time pouring into that single perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alan rested his forehead against hers. I want this, he said. I want us, not just as Janine's nanny, but as my partner, my love. Can we try? Can we see where this goes? Yes, Rosa breathed. Yes, Alan. I want that too. They kissed again and again, making up for 13 years of separation. And when they finally went back inside, hand in hand, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful and real. But their happiness didn't go unnoticed. Vivian, desperate and furious, began plotting. She hired a private investigator to dig into Rosa's past, looking for anything she could use to discredit her. She found Rosa's financial struggles, her medical debts from her parents' illnesses, even old social media photos from college that, taken out of context, could be made to look problematic. Then Vivian went to the board of Cosentino Tech with her concerns. She painted a picture of Rosa as a gold digger, an opportunist who had manipulated her way into Alan's life and was now influencing his business decisions. She suggested that Alan's recent changes, his reduced work hours and increased focus on family, were signs of compromised judgment. The board, conservative and traditional, began to worry. They scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss Alan's leadership and this concerning development in his personal life. Meanwhile, Rosa and Alan were navigating their new relationship. They took things slow, mindful of Janine and not wanting to confuse or upset her. They'd steal moments together after Janine was asleep, sitting on the terrace talking for hours, kissing like teenagers, dreaming about their future. Alan cut back his work hours even more, determined to be present for both Rosa and Janine. They had family dinners every night, weekend outings to museums and parks, movie nights curled up on the couch. Slowly, they were becoming what they all needed, a family. Then the blog post appeared. Billionaire CEO under the influence? Insiders question Alan Cosentino's new advisor. The article was vicious, full of half-truths and insinuations. It showed photos of Rosa, clearly taken without her knowledge, and questioned her qualifications, her background, her intentions. It suggested she was manipulating Alan for financial gain, that she was a bad influence on both him and his daughter. Rosa read the article with growing horror. All her worst fears, laid out in black and white for the world to see. She was being portrayed as exactly what Vivian had called her, a nobody trying to climb her way into a world where she didn't belong. I have to leave, Rosa told Alan, tears streaming down her face. They were in his office, the blog post pulled up on his computer screen. Alan, this is destroying you. The board is questioning your judgment, and it's because of me. If I leave, this all goes away. Absolutely not, Alan said fiercely, pulling her into his arms even as she tried to pull away. Rosa, I don't care what some trashy blog says. I don't care what the board thinks. I care about you, about us, about the family we're building. But it's not just about us, Rosa sobbed into his chest. It's about Janine, too. What if this affects her? What if kids at school see this and tease her about it? What if I end up hurting her just by being here? You could never hurt Janine, Alan said firmly. She loves you, she needs you, we both do. Before Rosa could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Rosa, are you crying? They both turned to see Janine standing there in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms, her face creased with worry. I'm okay, sweetheart, Rosa tried to say, but her voice broke on the words. Janine ran to them, wrapping her small arms around both Rosa and Alan. Don't cry, honey, she said, using the words Rosa had said to her that first night. Whatever's wrong, we'll fix it together. Because that's what families do. Rosa looked down at this beautiful, brave little girl, then up at Alan, and felt her heart crack open even more. They were right. They were a family, and families fought for each other. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'm staying. The next day, Alan walked into the emergency board meeting with Rosa by his side. David Brennan, his best friend and VP, had done some investigating of his own and discovered that Vivian was behind the blog post and the concerns being raised with the board. Alan laid out the evidence calmly, professionally. He explained that Vivian had violated company policy and possibly laws in her campaign against Rosa. He made it clear that if the board had a problem with his personal life, they were welcome to replace him, but he'd be taking his top clients and his patents with him. It was a risky move, but it paid off. Vivian was fired on the spot. The board, while still concerned about appearances, agreed to let Alan run his personal life as he saw fit, as long as it didn't affect the company's bottom line. Victory, but at a cost. Rosa felt the weight of scrutiny now, the knowledge that people were watching, judging, waiting for her to fail. But she also felt the strength of Alan's love and Janine's support. She wasn't alone anymore. Months passed. The scandal died down, replaced by newer gossip about other people. Rosa enrolled in online classes to finish her degree, studying late into the night while Alan worked beside her in comfortable silence. Janine thrived, her nightmares becoming less frequent, her smile more constant. The drawings of Eleanor still covered her wall, but now there were new drawings too, of Rosa and Alan and Janine together, a complete family. Alan proposed on a cold December evening, in that same restaurant at the top of Willis Tower, where Rosa used to clean the windows. Janine was there, bouncing with excitement, holding the ring box. When Rosa said yes, the entire restaurant applauded, and Janine shouted, "We're going to be a real family." They married in a small ceremony 6 months later, just close friends and family. Janine was the flower girl, wearing the same navy blue dress from the day she and Rosa had first met. Rosa wore a simple white dress, nothing fancy. But when Alan saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "You're not so bad yourself," Rosa whispered back. And they both laughed, remembering a similar exchange when they were 17 and everything was new. Now, 2 years after that first fateful meeting on Michigan Avenue, Rosa stood in her kitchen making heart-shaped pancakes for breakfast. Alan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and kissing her neck. "Good morning, Mrs. Cosentino Townsend," he murmured. "Good morning, Mr. Cosentino Townsend," Rosa replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. You guys are always kissing." Janine's voice came from the doorway, but she was grinning. "Get used to it, kiddo," Alan said, laughing. "You're stuck with us." "Good," Janine said, coming over to hug them both. "Because you're stuck with me too." As they sat down to breakfast, the morning sun streaming through the windows, Rosa looked at her family and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that night 2 years ago when she'd found a lost little girl on a cold sidewalk. She'd stopped to help because she couldn't walk away from someone in pain. She'd had no idea that helping Janine would lead her back to her first love, would give her the family she'd always dreamed of, would give her a second chance at happiness. Life was strange and surprising and sometimes cruel, but it was also full of moments of grace. Moments when you stopped to help a stranger and found your destiny. Moments when love got a second chance. Moments when broken people came together and healed each other. Rosa Cosentino Townsend, former high school dropout and cleaning lady, now had a college degree hanging on her wall, a daughter who called her Mama Rosa, a husband who looked at her like she hung the moon, and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. And it all started with 4 simple words, spoken to a crying child on a cold Chicago sidewalk. "Don't cry, honey." Those words had changed everything. They'd brought 3 lost souls together and made them whole. They'd turned pain into purpose and loneliness into love. They'd proven that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the biggest consequences. As Rosa watched Alan help Janine with her homework later that day, as she heard them laughing together, as she felt the warmth and love filling their home, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Thanks for that October evening. Thanks for the courage to stop when everyone else walked by. Thanks for second chances and new beginnings and the beautiful, messy, perfect family they'd become. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. Built on loss and struggle, on patience and forgiveness, on choosing love even when it was scary and complicated. It was a story of 3 people who'd been broken in different ways, finding each other and becoming stronger together than they'd ever been apart. And every morning when Rosa made those heart-shaped pancakes that Eleanor had started and she'd continued, she felt the presence of the woman she'd never met, but would always honor. Eleanor had loved Alan and Janine with everything she had, and Rosa was determined to love them the same way. Not as a replacement, but as an addition. One more person to love them, to protect them, to make sure they knew every single day how precious they were. This was home, this was family, this was love. And Rosa Cosentino Townsend, who'd once felt invisible and insignificant, now knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, loving exactly who she was meant to love. The story that began with "Don't cry, honey," had become a story of hope and healing, of second chances and new beginnings, of a family that chose each other and fought for each other and loved each other through everything. And they lived, not happily ever after in some perfect, problem-free way, but happily, messily, beautifully ever after in the real, complicated, wonderful way that actual families do. And that was the best ending of all. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.